Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Catherine Myers, and I will be the host for this TLC session. We are excited that you've joined us today for Disrupting Asynchronous Learning, Analyzing Use of Zoom for Student Engagement and Success, presented by Dr. Jennifer Vogel and Dr. Alan Belcher. Please welcome Drs. Vogel and Belcher. Take it away, guys.
All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Just a quick note, Alan and I are joining you from Europe. We actually just presented on this topic at a conference on Monday in Spain. So we're still here. We're coming home tomorrow. So it's still fresh in our minds. So thank you so much for joining us. Yes, they have internet here. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. Alan, if you can go to the next slide. We're going to start with a couple of poll questions to get you thinking. Let me pull those up for you. Okay, so hopefully you can see that there are 3 questions for you to consider before we get started. So first, we just want to get your experience. Have you ever used live sessions with students, either here at Ashford, in Zoom, or some other platform, or someplace else where perhaps you've taught? Okay, and then what are your thoughts on having live sessions? Do you think it would improve student success? And then similarly, do you think it would help to create a learning community in Ashford courses? Give you another maybe minute to respond to the poll questions, then we'll show the results. Hopefully everybody can see that. You might have to scroll down because all 3 questions are together. Okay, about 10 more seconds or so. If you haven't responded, we've got about 15 out of 23 people who have responded. All right, I'll go ahead and end the polling and share the results. Okay, hopefully you guys can see those. So the first question, have you ever used live sessions with students either here at Ashford or anywhere else? Most people, 59%, said that they have. And as far as having live sessions improving student success, most people here are thinking strongly agree or agree. Some not so sure. And then the third question, creating that sense of a learning community. So most people, again, strongly agree or agree. Right, great. Thank you, guys. We'll come back to some other poll questions a little bit later. And now I will hand it over to Alan for some other questions.
Okay, you got to make things work here. If you would, in the chat, these are just some more open-ended questions that we'd like to get a little bit of information from you. What benefits do you think might exist if you are positively disposed to think about having live sessions for students? And what challenges might exist to make this happen in your classes? If you could just put a couple of comments, if you have such, right there in the chat, we'll try to pick those up and process them really quickly. First challenge that pops up is that it could be more time consuming. And I think we had that conversation the other day that yes, it certainly can be. One positive, a greater connection between students and instructors. I think we believe that one. Real-time responses and follow-up so that people will get their questions answered quickly. Maybe it leads to a greater understanding. Okay, thank you all for all of these answers that you're putting in there. Being able to help students process the information to create deeper learning. Well, that certainly is one of the things that we found in the literature. We'll mention that here mostly in just a moment. Developing clarity, the technology challenge of not knowing how to use these tools, that certainly will be an issue. And will the students come if we offer that to them? Multiple time zones, military students who may or may not have access. I know sometimes that is an issue for some of my students. And let's see here. Early adopters were turned off by the synchronous requirement because we are offering things in an asynchronous platform or mode. That certainly is true. And students were turned off because we didn't do a good job with it in our class experiences. And traditional students are seeking online education, but they do have a craving for human interaction. Thanks, Lisa, for those, and thanks everybody for all of those commentary. Many of those things we found to be true, and we will comment on a number of those as we go along here. So thank you all for putting the information out there.
Okay, yeah, thanks. These are great ideas here that we'll circle back to for sure. So Alan and I completed a study this year, and the purpose of the study was to offer some optional live sessions or synchronous sessions in a course that we were both teaching multiple sections of. And we wanted to see what was the impact of those live sessions on student engagement in the course, and then their academic performance as measured by course completion, retention to their next course, their final course grade, and their program learning outcome mastery. And what we really were trying to do is to address the potential disconnect that some students may experience in an environment that is solely online, solely asynchronous learning environment. You know, and as we looked at the literature, again, Alan will talk about that some more, but certainly we know that students have different learning styles. And for some students, strictly online, asynchronous, text-based, you know, typing in their answers on discussions and reading, it works really well for them. Other students crave more of that interactivity with other people, seeing people face-to-face, having real conversations with people. So as far as learning styles, you know, solely online could be difficult for some students, especially those students, you know, a lot of our students who are non-traditional, who come to us kind of underprepared and under-resourced most of the time. So having some more human connection really could be beneficial. So that was the purpose of our study, was to take a look at that. Okay, Alan, back to you.
Have to learn how to run the machine. You'd think maybe I had a little bit of experience with Zoom, but maybe, well, you'll find out that that's not really true. When we reviewed literature that already existed, we found a few things that I think for the most part we would have imagined would be the case anyway. But with changes in the quality of technology and in learning platforms in the last few years, more and more schools are beginning to use or have been using video communication, not just between instructor and student, but student to student, and as we're doing now in meetings and conferences and that sort of thing. Of course, our learning management system, Canvas, and most others now have built-in video recording, and you know, it's really easy. It's getting easier and easier, in fact, all the time, to drop a short video into an announcement, a discussion, or even the feedback. We found that faculty are also using video conferencing to establish online office hours for students just to drop in. And it was found that real-time communication like this adds a more personal component to an otherwise asynchronous classroom experience. One thing of note, while asynchronous discussion forums allow students more time to stop and reflect, that goes away in a synchronous communication to some degree. But even with that, there are advantages to synchronous communication. So having reviewed that, we thought we'd really like to see for ourselves what happens when we use video conferencing with students here at Ashford. So that's what brought us to this point.
All right, thanks, Alan. So for our methodology, the way we went about this, our audience were students who were enrolled in the graduate Masters of Arts in Education program, taking EDU 692, which in that program is typically the second or third course that students take. So it was definitely convenient sampling for our methodology, because this was the course that we were teaching at the time. And I also want to thank Jen Robinson and Maureen Lenow for also helping out with this, with their sections of this course as well. So we were using Zoom web conferencing, just like we're using now. And students attended as many live sessions as they could during that 6-week course. They were told about it like the very first few days of the class, and given the opportunity to kind of sign up to do it. Some students did it every week. Some attended just 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, depending on their schedule, but as many as they could attend, they did attend. And after attending the sessions, they completed a Qualtrics survey, and then we gathered the student success metrics. And then we analyzed the survey via SPSS, and then the qualitative responses were coded as well. Alan, I think I have another slide on methods. Okay. So as we noted in our chat earlier before we got started, what would be some of the challenges to having live synchronous sessions? And more than one person in the chat mentioned scheduling, and that was definitely the case. So trying to set up a time and day that was convenient for most students. And as we know, we're not just dealing with 4 time zones when we teach. We're kind of dealing with things around time zones from around the world. We have a lot of military students, and they're dialing in from all over the place. I know that when I was teaching one of the sections, I had a student in Germany and one in Thailand, and they both were like, "Oh, I really want to come to these sessions," but they weren't able to do so. And just as a side note, Alan and I discussed, do we want to record them and then have students watch them? And we actually chose to not record them, because we wanted it to be what it was intended to be, which is a live experience where they would be together. So that was a choice that we made, and perhaps someone might do this differently, but we chose to not record them. So we went with the 40-minute Zoom sessions, because back in the spring, I guess we were doing this, we only had the 40-minute Zoom capability instead of the full capability that we now have. So the sessions would start out with getting to know one another, really creating a sense of community. It was great. It's kind of the first few minutes of class, so to speak. The students are chit-chatting with each other and finding commonalities. Then we discussed upcoming assignments for that week with a lot of instructor guidance, and then asked a lot of clarifying questions, or the students were able to, and we found that was a real big plus from that was feedback from them, that they really loved being able to ask real-time questions of their instructor instead of sending an email and waiting for a response. Okay, so yeah, that's it.
We collected data in 2 different forms. The first was we did survey the students. Jen just mentioned that. And we asked a series of questions and asked them to agree or strongly agree or disagree with those statements. And the big results that we got are shown here on this slide. One of the things that I think was really interesting, well, the first 2 results here, that students felt more connected to the instructor, and that they felt we were creating a learning community. Now, we tend to think that's important in order to keep students in class, engaged, connected, and hopefully then retained on, to the next course and to graduation. Students seemed to think that the technology was fine. There was no real issues with that. I will have to say at this point that our sample size, or the number of students that did respond, was much smaller than what we had hoped. In fact, the number of students that participated was smaller than what we had hoped. And so we're trying to drill through some of the data and figure out why that is and what we could do differently the next time. Students also believed, as noted in the 4th item there, that attending the sessions positively impacted their success in the course. Now, they believed that. We'll find out here in a minute whether or not that was true when we look at some of the other data. Another interesting thing that didn't make the top, but 80% of the students who responded to our survey thought adding synchronous sessions to other classes would be a good idea. I think that's a pretty good number. 4 out of every 5 thought that would be a case. The one that was lower than what we perhaps would have anticipated or hoped for was that students felt connected to their classmates, but only at 70% of the respondents felt that way. And so maybe that would suggest to us, if we want students to be more connected to their classmates, that these sessions need to be somehow less focused on assignments and more focused on perhaps getting to know each other. So there's another a number of things there that most by and large very positive things there. And then the other type of data that we collected had to do with program learning outcome mastery and course completion rates. In the Master of Arts program, there are 9 program learning outcomes. This course addresses at least parts of 7 of those outcomes through the assignments that are mapped, back to the major learning outcomes for our program. We found only 1 of those 7 that had a measurably higher score for student performance in the sections that had the synchronous video compared to the sections that did not. And that was one of our learning outcomes, that our students will learn to design learner-centered instruction. Now, that certainly makes sense because what we were doing was trying to make things more learner-centered. So perhaps students saw that, we don't know exactly why that was the case, but we did find that to be true. In terms of the other program learning outcomes, a couple were a little bit higher, a couple were a little bit lower, and the rest were, right at the same score. So this was the only one that had any appreciable difference. And when we looked at course completion rates, 93% completion rate in those sections where we had the video conferencing, and 92% in the sections that did not have it. So 1% difference, not at all a significant change. So then, what do we make of all of that? Well, we certainly believe that we need to do more of this kind of research. We need to find out, is this a tool that we should be using, that we could be using for our students here at Ashford? Again, our response rate was small, smaller than we had hoped, and certainly not at this point fully generalizable to our student population. But we would like to see this occur perhaps even in undergraduate classes that that I don't teach. Jen is now involved in some undergrad courses over in the general education division. And then we also think it's important to do this type of research, whether it's related to the use of video or not, to invite more student feedback and get their contributions to help us shape how we can go about better supporting them, teaching them, working with them, facilitating their learning. We think that's just something that we really need to think more ways that we can get that input from students. Jen?
Yes, and also we thought further study to analyze the student level data to determine if having these live sessions does in fact impact student achievement and persistence. It'd be one thing to have the sessions because it's a great community builder and students are more connected with one another, and that's great, and that's certainly reason enough to do it. But if we can also show that it impacts their course completion or their success in general, that's even more of an argument to have these as well. So we would need to do more study to see if that would indeed be the case. And then lastly, just recommendation that institutions or faculty who wish can include these synchronous videos at any time. They can make themselves available to students. and then also learn more about how to use the tools and techniques. And I believe that at this point that all faculty, our full-time faculty and our associate faculty have now all been given access to a Zoom account. I believe. If that's not correct, please someone tell me. So it is out there. So if you haven't been using Zoom yet with your students, we highly recommend it. Okay. So now we're going to circle back to some more poll questions. Let me launch these. Okay, just 2 this time. So first one, would you consider using live sessions in your courses? Yes, no, or maybe, and then I'm going to ask for some feedback for those people who gave those responses. And then should Ashford, excuse me, should Ashford consider requiring live sessions in classes? Yeah, and if you look at the wording of the question, we're not saying should we require it, we're saying should we consider it? Is this something we should think about, perhaps? Okay.
And let me just say, while you're finishing up your responses there are some comments in the chat that we'll try to address in just a moment.
Okay, about 10 more seconds, and then I'll show the results. Okay, great. So the first question, would you consider using live sessions in your classes? Most people, 65%, said that they would. Okay. Is there anybody who said yes who would want to share why you think that? Why you would consider it? Feel free to unmute, come on the line, or type in the chat. If not, that's okay. We'll move on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kelly, I think that offering live sessions would honor students' interest in connecting in a different way. And for those students who are not, if that isn't their interest, or they're not able to, or for whatever reason, I still think providing the option is always great. People like choices.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. That's a great point. Yeah, and then the rest of other people responded maybe. So yes or maybe. That's great. So the second question, should Ashford consider requiring live sessions in classes? Most people here said no. So someone who said no, that we shouldn't require it or shouldn't even think about it, could we hear from one of you folks? Feel free to unmute or type in the chat.
Hey, Jen, this is Lisa. So I'll say that I actually voted yes on that, but I was going to post in the chat, and I'll just say what will have to happen, I think, for me to do it again, because I was very video intensive when Zoom first came out, is for the compliance metrics that were judged upon to be rethought for those experimentation courses, because I was substituting some replies, and I was even doing paper review grading with students live, which they loved, but that feedback had to be duplicated to meet compliance. So it doubled my workload and made it not worth my time for me, which is unfortunate. And because I was having to, do it twice, basically. So we'll have to, I would say no, unless the policies are there to support experimentation.
Yeah. Yeah, those are great points. Thank you, Lisa. Was there someone else who's going to say something?
Well, there are some comments in the chat about that. And Lane, I think you're exactly right. We want to make sure that if we're going to offer this, that students are going to take advantage of it, at least some of them. And it is a time factor for us. First of all, to gear up and learn how to do it effectively. Are we going to try to establish specific office hours for students each week? And then will that fit into the students' time schedule? We have to consider their time as well. There was a question earlier about how can we where do we find out how to use Zoom for our classes? That from James. And James, I can tell you that there is a bunch of how-tos posted in the CETL web pages. I will try to make sure that we get that directly into your hands. And other comments here. If the entire class came to the sessions, it'd be a great thing, but if only 5 came, and you know, then what do you do? Teresa Thomas, do you want to come on the line with your comment?
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. I use, for another university, I use synchronized seminars every Wednesday night, and I have probably 30 to 35 people. We also have available that for those who can't attend, then they have what's called option 2, where they are to listen to the recorded seminar and then give a brief summary over what was discussed, and then they submit it to the assignment section of the class, and it helps out a lot as far as, you know, the students understanding any expectations for a particular assignment. It's really great if they're not quite sure what they're supposed to do on a discussion, that we can talk about it and we can discuss their ideas. I mean, sometimes I wish we could use seminars for our discussions instead of having to write everything out, because our classes are so writing intense. But that's my input. I love them because I get to, the students get to see my sense of humor. They get to know me. You know, I share pictures like Halloween. I shared pictures of my whole family dressed up, you know, as Halloween pictures. It was great. It was a way to connect, and they loved it. And I'm a person who is all for it. So that's my comment.
Thanks, Teresa, very much for that. I appreciate your commentary. Folks, we have just about 2 or 3 minutes, and these are certainly some questions that have come to our mind about, you know, things that we want to think about. Maybe we, you know, as a university, start to have some conversation about, but we certainly welcome your questions as well. If you want to come on the line or put something in the chat, we'd be happy to try to respond in the couple of minutes that we have left. And I realize we may not have gotten everything out of the chat yet, but we will, since it's being recorded, we will review that and try to respond appropriately.
Yeah, Alan, I just wanted to kind of circle back to some things Lisa was talking about at the beginning of how when online schools were first coming out and what was the promise of an online program being asynchronous by design. And I think we've seen a bit of a trend. I'm starting to see more and more degree programs, like a graduate degree that's completely online, but there is a required weekly live sessions, and students know it. So they know that, yeah, I'm going to take this graduate course, but I know that every Wednesday at 4:30 or, you know, in the evening, I've got to be online to have my live session. And then so they have, it's like a flipped, it's like a hybrid, but, you know, a little bit different, flipped in a more heavily online way. But I see that trend sort of happening, and if students know that ahead of time, and it's not, you know, sprung on them as a requirement, it's different.
Yeah, that's true. Good point.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions, comments from anyone? You can chat or type in the chat or come online. We've got just about a minute left. And hearing nothing, I would like to say thank you to everyone for coming and participating today. Appreciate the conversation. And Jen, thank you for including me in your research project.
My pleasure.
And I will chime in as host and thank you both for sharing this with us. This was, like I said earlier, a topic I was really interested in. I'm loving the activity in the chat, so I hope this is something that you all can continue, maybe like a follow-up to this session, because I think there's a lot of great comments in there from all of our faculty, and it will be really good to remember that. So again, thank you all for attending this session. Thank you to Dr. Vogel and Dr. Belcher for your time. My alarm is going off as our official end of 30 minutes. So thank you all again. Have a wonderful day and enjoy the rest of TLC.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.